Okay, today in this video I'm going to be talking about Boolean logic and decision making, specifically in Java. So the first thing I'm going to go over are your major operators. So the first operator I'm talking about is the AND. So the syntax actually in Java is two ampersands. And so I like to think of like Boolean statements in a mathematical way because that's a lot more intuitive to me. So if you just say true and false is false, that might get confusing. So if you think of true as 1 and false as 0, then and the AND operator as multiplication, it makes it a lot easier. So true and false, what would that evaluate to? So true is 1 and is multiplication intuitively, false being 0. 1 times 0, you get 0, so that will evaluate to false. True and true, that's like 1 times 1, so you just end up with true. False and false, that would be like 0 times 0, so you just end up with false anyway. Okay, so the next operator I'm going to be talking about is OR. The syntax of it in Java looks like this. And when thinking about it mathematically, it's somewhat like a plus sign. So the statement true or false, that's kind of like 1 plus 0. You get 1 from that, so then that will evaluate to true. True or true is also going to evaluate to true, but it's kind of different when you do it mathematically. It's like 1 plus 1 equals 2, but I guess you can think of it as that's not 0, so that's still true. False or false, that's like 0 plus 0, and you get 0 from that, so the answer to that is false. Okay, so the next operator I'm going to be talking about it's called NOT. There's not really a mathematical equivalent, but it's very self-explanatory. Basically, it's not whatever answer you get. So, not true is false, not false is true. And then if you put on the outside of a statement in parentheses, it's whatever that evaluates to, but the opposite. So for this example, true and false is going to evaluate to false. So not false is true. So this whole statement will evaluate to true. Okay, so the next concept here is called precedence. So that's basically just the order of operations for your Boolean operators. So it goes not and or. So for these two examples, okay, not true, since that's done before the or, not true will first evaluate to false. The statement will be false or true, which then evaluates to true. It's different if you put parentheses there, so you have to keep that in mind. You have to do the parentheses first. So true or true, it evaluates to true, not true is equal to false. So these statements are identical except for the fact that this one has parentheses and you get opposite answers, so you always have to keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about De Morgan's Law. De Morgan's Law is kind of important because it has applications in Java and it kind of helps your overall understanding of Boolean logic. So the formal definition of De Morgan's Law is the negation of a conjunction is the disjunction of the negations. So, I mean, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, to put it in simple terms, not A and B is the same as not A or not B, and not A or B is the same as not A and not B. So, basically, all you're doing is you distribute the not to each of the booleans, and you change the middle operation. Now this is the actual syntax, and I'm going to explain how decision making will actually work in Java. So you use what's called the if-else statement. So how it's formatted is if and then you have a Boolean statement in parentheses, and then the body, which is in brackets. So if the Boolean evaluates to true, then the body code will be executed. And so if you don't have an else statement and you just have if this and it isn't true, nothing happens. It'll just skip over it. And if it is true, then it'll execute it. Now once you add the else, what happens is if the Boolean is true, it still executes the body. But if it's not true, then it executes the body of the else statement. So in an if-else, something is always being executed, whereas in just an if, it's not guaranteed that anything will actually happen. And an else statement, you need to have an if statement before it. You can't just have an else statement, whereas you can just have an if statement. Okay, so this is kind of a combined example, and I'm also introducing that if-else if statement. So basically it's just an if statement, but it has multiple ifs, and it's going to execute the first one and then just break the loop. So in this example, it goes if true and false, it'll execute body 1. So we know that true and false evaluates to false, so that will not be executed. The second else if is true, so then it's going to execute body 2 and then break out of the decision. So even though that this else if also evaluates to true, body 3 will not be executed because after it already 1 evaluates to true, that's the one that's going to do. So if, for example, though, all of these were false, then you could still have an else at the end, and that would be executed. Alright, here's another easy example. So it runs through the first one. If true and false together is false. So that's not going to be executed. It's going to go to the next else if true and true. That will evaluate to true, so that one will be executed, and neither of those are. So another type of decision making, which actually doesn't use Booleans really, it uses integers, is called the switch case. So basically how it works is you have switch and then a certain integer that will, when put in, will activate a certain case. So, for example, if we declare an integer I to be equal to 4, and then we put that variable I into a switch statement, it will look at the different cases which you have to define. So case 3, it would execute body 1. So it goes to case 4, and it checks that that is indeed the integer. Then it'll execute body 2. And you have to make sure that you put a break statement in between each body at the end of the body, because if you don't, then it's just going to execute every one after the first one activated. So in this situation, it would look at case 4 and execute body 2 and then the default case, because if you don't have a break statement. So if you put a break there, it would do body 2 and then be done. What the default is if none of the other cases are activated, it will run the default case. It's not required, but it definitely helps out a lot and makes it a lot easier. So thank you for watching. I hope that was able to help. If you have any other questions, there's tons of resources online, so good luck learning Java.